Fine city Ternopil. It's mostly known for its embankment, delicious coffee, and incredible coziness. However, today it will reveal itself to you from a different side. After all, in the past few years, the city and its surroundings, unfortunately, have not escaped some gruesome and, without a doubt, high-profile murders, which we will talk about today. 4 crimes that happened in Ternopil and the region still keep the channel's team in fear. Because while preparing this video, we realized that this fine city can also be a city of horror. Sit back and get comfortable, dear ones, because this is undoubtedly scary. These black eyes are not Photoshop and not contact lenses, they are real. This is the look of Andriy Horbatiuk, known to the public as the Ternopil demon, or vampire. At first he shocked Ukraine with changes to his appearance and later with the extremely brutal murder of his girlfriend in which he inflicted 99 stab wounds. So, in 2014 Ternopil, among other things, gained the reputation of being the city where a demon lives. And all because of one particular person, with fangs, elf-like ears and black eyes. It was in 2014 that a television program with the loud title, "My Son is Turning into a Demon," was aired. On that show, Ukraine Speaks, the boy's mother said that she wasn't just ashamed of him and didn't want him to tell anyone they were even related, but that she was actually afraid of him. She was afraid to live with him in the same apartment. We're talking about Andriy Horbatiuk. It's hard to believe now, but the boy grew up as a completely normal child in a completely normal family. His family included his mother, Natalia, who owned a beauty salon in Ternopil, as well as his father and brother. Andriy's friend, Alexander, recalled that he wasn't a bad kid, not at all. He could laugh, support you when needed. Well, let's listen to a quote from Alexander himself. "Since 2003 we studied together at school. I can say that we were a bit alike, both insecure. It was hard to find common ground with our peers. I remember when we were in 7th grade, we used to run near the school during PE class. At that time, Andriy's shoelace came undone, and I accidentally stepped on it. As a result, Andriy tripped, fell, and tore a tendon in his right arm. I apologized to him for a long time, but he joked, saying it was good that it happened to his right arm. He won't be able to write during lessons." When Andriy turned 13, a tragedy happened in the family. His father passed away, and it seems that this affected the boy more than it did the other family members. He had never been eager to share his thoughts and feelings with others, and after his father died, he completely withdrew into himself. One day, a neighbor saw the teenager. The boy was sitting under the building where he lived. And he wasn't just crying, he was sobbing. The woman brought him home, and Andriy told his mother that he still hurts a lot because of his father's death. The man was an authority figure for his son, and losing him caused real trauma, but they say time heals. And it seemed like this was exactly about Andriy's story. Andriy gradually returned to his usual communication with friends, started writing poems again, and took up sports. He even helped his friend Alexander overcome anorexia, giving him advice on how to improve his routine, sleep, and nutrition. And during that period, Andriy began to express himself more and more in what was then called an informal way. He wore black clothes, listened to rock music, and it is rumored that for some time he belonged to the goth subculture. Something like that. Around the age of 18, the guy dyed his hair a bright color. It's not known exactly which color, but it's known that it was unusual. As you can guess, Andriy's mother didn't like it. She told him about it. Andriy listened and continued his experiments. He didn't really pay attention to her opinion. Moreover, to jump ahead a bit, and as you could already tell from Andriy's photos, it didn't stop with just his hair. Later, Andriy got tattoos all over his body, but that's nothing, at least compared to the fact that he modified his ears. He found a specialist who made his ears elongated, similar to those of an elf. Of course, if his mom didn't like the dyed hair, she definitely didn't appreciate the elf ears at all. Moreover, they eventually even started to rot. Andriy's mother recalls that pieces of the ear just fell off, just like that. Over time, the situation was managed. His mother helped find ointments and solutions that stopped the flesh from rotting. But she couldn't stop the deeper changes in her son. Andriy grew fangs for himself, like a vampire. He split his tongue to make it look like a snake's. And he also dropped out of law school, even though he dreamed of becoming a lawyer since childhood. Horbatiuk was a student at Ternopil National Economic University, law faculty. He was expelled in his third year of college due to frequent absences after completing 2 years. Andriy himself said that he just lost interest and he no longer saw himself in this field. The guy paid much more attention to his appearance changes. And in 2014, he decided to take a rather radical step. He decided to dye his eyeballs black. Just imagine how people reacted to this, even to the idea of it, in 2014 in Ternopil. It wasn't that easy to find a specialist who could do what Andriy wanted, but eventually he found Ruslan and Tatiana Podvashchetsky. It was a tattoo artist he knew, and his wife, who was also a tattoo artist.
I've had a passion for piercing for 8 years. In total, I had 73 piercings on my face.
His face is covered in tattoos. One day, Ruslan decided to conquer not just his city, but the whole country. He dared to do something that no one had ever done before in Ukraine.
The operation was to be performed by Ruslan, and his wife Tatiana would assist him. She knew a bit about medicine, since she had graduated from medical college. True, her specialty was obstetrician-gynecologist, but at that time it was better than nothing. It's worth mentioning that the tattoo artist, Ruslan, had never performed such an operation before. He had never made eyes black. But still, he decided to take this step because Andriy told him to.
I hadn't done this before either. It was the first time. He knew it. He insisted.
He said, if you don't do it, I'll take the syringe myself and do it. Other people heard it too. Or I'll go to Russia.
It's also worth adding here that Ruslan and Andriy were friends. Before working on Andriy's eyes, Ruslan Podvashchetsky practiced on pig heads. Right before the surgery, he warned that the chances of the guy not being able to see, either immediately or over time, were very high.
I said, Andriy, you don't need this. There's a 95 to 97% chance that you'll lose your sight completely. He still, in short, says, yes, I know there's such a chance, but I still insist that you do it.
Horbatiuk didn't care. He wrote a note stating that he was aware of his actions and would have no claims against Ruslan and his wife, and then lay down for the injection. Fortunately for Andriy, the process went without terrible consequences, and the guy got what he wanted, black sclera in his eyes. To complete his demonic look, he also used different contact lenses. And they say that he even had horns sewn onto himself, not just wore them from time to time. All of this was discussed in the program My Son is Turning into a Demon in 2014. But soon after the release, the episode about Andriy was forgotten. It was only remembered again in 2019, and unfortunately, because of tragic events, during this time, Andriy's life completely fell apart. First of all, he got into bodybuilding. No, that's totally fine, but he decided not to build muscles the usual way, but to inject himself with steroids. That was the first warning sign. Notably, at 25, Andriy was essentially doing nothing with his life. In all, he only worked around 3 months. As he put it, he was his uncle's computer guy, and still lived with his mother. During this same period, the man's mental state began to deteriorate rapidly. As Andriy himself recalls, he was troubled by sudden attacks of fear for no reason, and he would just curl up in a corner, cry, and scream. The boy's mother supposedly even sent him to a monastery for 2 weeks. For some reason, it didn't help. Moreover, Andriy regularly used amphetamines. Sometimes it happened daily for half a year. Later, ecstasy, lysergic acid diethylamide mushrooms, methadone, and ketamine were added. Andriy stayed in rehab centers multiple times, including near Kharkiv, in Kharkiv, and in Kyiv. And for a while it helped. After he left rehab, he could stay clean for about half a year. But eventually, he would go back to his old habits. That same friend, Alexander, whom I mentioned at the beginning, said, "We tried talking to him, explaining that he was sick, that he needed to get rid of it. Sometimes we got positive results. He would turn over a new leaf, you could say. He would go through a course of treatment and become the same good Andriy we used to know, and then he would relapse again. We repeatedly went out at night looking for him, to take him to a medical or social center for help. Andriy continued to communicate with Ruslan and Tatiana Podvashchetsky even after they helped him modify his eyes. And it was a bit strange. Andriy could literally spend the night at their doorstep because he craved communication. But Tatiana didn't want to keep in touch with him, at least after she found out that the guy was using. Here's what Tatiana's friend Horbatiuk remembers.
She didn't accept him since he started using drugs. Because Tanya didn't drink or smoke. In her whole life, she only had a few cocktails. She saw that this person was just going downhill and told Rosalind that she didn't want to talk to him anymore. They decided to limit their communication with Andriy. He's a rotten person. You need to stay away from people like that.
By 2019, Ruslan and Tatiana had broken up. The couple split, but they maintained a friendly relationship and even lived together for some time after they had separated. Eventually, Ruslan moved out of the apartment and left Tatiana to live alone in her apartment at 9 Kurbasa Street in Ternopil. In 2019, that same Tatiana was 27 years old. By that time, in her hometown, she was already known as a popular tattoo artist with her own studio. Moreover, the girl was actively running her social media and really stood out in appearance. Bright hair, hairstyles, makeup, and a lot of tattoos on her body. It was hard not to notice her in a crowd. But despite such a seemingly rebellious image, Tatiana actually led a rather calm lifestyle. She loved walks, was interested in art, watched cartoons and her favorite television shows. On April 17, 2019, Tatiana was planning to go to Russia to meet the mother of her new boyfriend. But the day before, on April 15th, she had a visitor. Around 9 in the evening, a dark-eyed Andriy Horbatiuk appeared at Tatiana's apartment door. He said he came to finish the tattoo that Ruslan had started for him. The young people started talking and discussing how best to finish the design. Tatiana even called her ex to consult, since he was the one who started this tattoo. Andriy went to the kitchen, Tatiana's kitchen, and started peeling potatoes to get ready for dinner. When Tatiana finished consulting with her ex-husband, she returned to Andriy. Then they started talking about topics unrelated to tattoos, in particular about the lifestyle that Andriy leads. Tatiana told him that he should quit drugs, but this made him angry. He disliked it completely and lost his temper. Within minutes, the guy grabbed a kitchen knife and stabbed Tatiana. Then he did it again, and again, and again. The girl tried to save herself. She cried and screamed, threw things at her attacker, scratched him with her nails. But nothing could stop the demon that Andriy seemed to have become. He kept stabbing her over and over again. Neck, shoulders, arms, face, torso. He damaged an artery, the thyroid, veins, the trachea, and the abdominal cavity. This went on until Tatiana collapsed on the floor, completely exhausted. There were 99 stab wounds on her body, and the most terrifying thing was that she was still alive. She didn't die immediately, but lived for another 2 or 3 hours. During this time, she suffered. But what was Andriy doing during this time? There are several versions. According to the first version, he immediately left the apartment, and according to the other, he went to the kitchen to finish cooking dinner, then ate, and then took a shower. All while Tatiana was slowly dying. In any case, at night the guy returned to his home, and let me remind you, he was still living with his mother, even though back in 2014 on the show she said she didn't want to, even was afraid to live with him. Whatever the case, at 4 in the morning he made it home, wearing clothes stained with blood. He didn't try to hide anything from his mother, he directly told her that he had killed a person. After that, he jumped on his bicycle and rode away. What exactly they managed to talk about is unknown, but it is known that early in the morning, Andriy was already at the bus station in Ternopil. After wandering around there for a while, he took a taxi, and around 10 in the morning, he called his mother. He told her to come to the central department store. When they met, the woman handed her son a small sports bag, paid the taxi driver for him since the boy had no money, and gave him some cash to take with him. Afterwards, Andriy requested another ride to the bus station. During the trip, the taxi driver made a stop at the pharmacy. Andriy bought some pills, took them right at the destination, and asked to sit in the car for a little while longer. A couple of minutes, the taxi driver recalls that the guy was very agitated but tried to act as if everything was fine. In addition, the strange passenger's clothes were all dirty and his face was scratched. However, he said that he just fell off his bicycle and that everything was okay. Around 11 in the morning, the mother came to meet her son again, this time at the bus station. On the way, she stopped by her workplace and now brought him a larger amount of money. At the same time, Andriy was changing into clean clothes in the bus station restroom, and he gave his blood-stained jacket to his mother. And she just packed it in some bag right on a bench near the bus station and threw it in the trash. She also purchased a Lviv ticket at the office, apparently to send him to rehab. Eventually, after waiting for his bus, Andriy headed to the city of Lviv. Around the same time, 2 people, a woman and a man, came to the apartment at 9 Kurbasa Street. The thing is, the apartment where Tatiana Podvashchetska lived had been under renovation since February, and on the morning of April 16th, a friend of Tatiana's mother was supposed to come with a handyman to continue the work. Of course, the girl knew about this meeting since they had agreed on the time in advance. Initially, the woman and handyman rang the doorbell and knocked, but no one answered. Then they decided to use the key they had with them from Tatiana herself. But there was no need for the key because the door was open. The handyman was the first to step inside. He immediately saw the mess. He said that everything was splattered with something. Looking a little further, he saw a niche where the bed used to be before the renovation. And now Tatiana Podvashchetska's body was lying there. The master decided not to do anything on his own. He called the woman who was with him and told her what had happened, what he had seen. Afterwards, they contacted the police. Forensic experts soon arrived to examine the crime scene. What they saw shocked even the experienced experts. Bloody fingerprints and palm prints were everywhere. In the hallway, in the bathroom, on the doors. It seems that Tatiana tried to open the window to call for help. After all, the glass was all covered in red stains. But it was all in vain. The robbery version was dismissed almost immediately. First of all, there were basically no valuables in the apartment, and in the woman's purse, which most likely belonged to Tatiana, the police found money that the perpetrator hadn't touched. To find suspects, the police checked Tatiana's client list and found out that a certain Andriy Horbatiuk was supposed to visit her. But as we know, he was no longer at home when they tried to catch him, so the young man was declared wanted. And soon in Lviv, where the Ternopil demon had fled, he was apprehended. Interestingly, at first the young man confessed to what he had done and said he was very, very sorry. After the court ruled that Horbatiuk should remain in custody during the investigation, he gave several comments to journalists, and he said the following. Regret isn't even the right word. I don't remember anything. I didn't come to her, I came to her ex-husband. But he didn't say why he was looking for her ex-husband at Tatiana's house when he knew they hadn't been together for a long time. Andriy also said that he lost his mind because he often had to stay in rehabilitation centers, since the conditions there were terrible. Supposedly now, whenever he just hears about rehabilitation centers, he loses it, starts to panic, and can't control himself. Andriy said that he doesn't remember anything in detail, but he assumed that Tatiana might have mentioned something about such a place. And when he heard the door slam, he thought they were coming for him. That's probably why he grabbed the knife. He also said that he and Tatiana actually had a very good relationship, extremely friendly, but that's not all. The thing is, those were his words after the first court hearing where they were choosing a preventive measure for him. But the following year, on October 28th, 2020 in court, he stated that he didn't kill anyone at all.
He arrived at 9 o'clock. Then he communicated with Ruslan via Viber.
He was talking to Ruslan, and after that, Ruslan hung up and she went to cook potatoes.
When she was cooking potatoes, she cut herself, and after that, I left there around 10:30.
Then he told a story about how the next morning he fell off his bicycle and got bruised. That's where all the scratches came from.
I fell off my bicycle, hit myself hard, and then left the bicycle outside.
And then I went to Lviv to meet a friend. However, he didn't say which friend exactly.
He went to Lviv because he wanted to go to a rehabilitation center. But the person didn't meet me there. I went to buy a phone, and after that, I wanted to go to a hotel. And after that, they accepted me.
They put handcuffs on me and sent me to the station. He didn't understand at all what was happening or why. The lawyers then explained that Andriy's testimony, which he had given in court earlier, and in which he admitted guilt, would not be taken into account, because at the first court hearing, they were choosing a preventive measure, not considering the case itself. When asked why he said something completely different at the court of first instance, the young man answered this way. I partially admitted my guilt because when I was detained, they told me all sorts of things, saying that I would go to jail no matter what. The evidence is all there, allowing me to reduce my sentence. Since I was under the influence of drugs and then took a long time to recover from that state, I was scared about what would happen to me at all. I had no lawyers or anyone to consult with, so I said those things. Horbatiuk's mother refused to testify against him in court. After all, she has that right by law. The case of the Ternopil demon was considered for over a year. Time was needed for Andriy Horbatiuk to be examined by a forensic psychiatrist. After all, there was a slight possibility that he was insane. However, the expert stated that Horbatiuk does not have any mental illnesses. He is fully aware of his actions and can be held accountable before the law. After the verdict, sending him to a psychiatric hospital instead of a penal colony was no longer an option. The relatives of the deceased Tatiana were convinced that Andriy should be sentenced to life imprisonment. The girl's mother, Svetlana Krapko, lived in New Zealand, where she had been working for a long time, but she came in person to her daughter's funeral and the court hearing.
My child suffered. She was alive and she suffered. When I opened her coffin, her little left hand was all cut. It was all cut here, and I understood. Since she was left-handed like me, she was hitting like this, and both her hands were cut. The same with him, his whole neck, right here. Each blow was twisted 90 degrees. It was written that there were 50 blows, just to the neck, and then on the back, I understood that she suffered. She suffered so much, 50, oh God, and she was turning, and he was still hitting her on the back. Do you understand what suffering, what torment she went through?
In addition, the Podvashetska family stated that Horbatiuk has to pay them 2 million hryvnias in moral compensation. The family planned to donate this money to charity. Part of it to the church, and part of it for the treatment of children with cancer. And the second, by the way, not the first. That's a good initiative. The family was prompted to make this decision by the kind of person Tatiana was, and by what she herself had to go through. It was revealed in court that the girl had been seriously ill since childhood, with her arms hurting a lot from the age of 5. Gradually, her ability to move her fingers diminished, and doctors performed 14 surgeries to preserve the mobility of her limbs and also assigned her a disability status. Like Tatiana's mother, her grandmother also worked abroad for a long time to save money for her granddaughter's treatment. And when she found out that her granddaughter had passed away, she lost her eyesight due to stress.
Tanya is my only granddaughter. I washed dishes with cold water in Italy for 5 years. I earned pennies from my granddaughter's treatment because she had a congenital illness. She was operated on in Kharkiv and he killed her. 100 knife wounds. I brought this knife from Italy. Tanya was very kind. She helped people. She never passed by an old lady on the street who was asking for money. How could anyone do something like that to such a child?
Podvashetska's relatives were worried that Andriy might avoid punishment. After all, supposedly his family has money. Horbatiuk himself never admitted guilt during all the court hearings. He never once apologized to Tatiana's relatives. On November 11, 2020, the Ternopil City District Court found Andriy Horbatiuk guilty of intentional murder with particular cruelty. He was sentenced to life imprisonment and ordered to pay 500,000 hryvnias in moral damages to the mother of the murdered woman. In his verdict, the judge relied on the fact that the young man never showed remorse, as well as on how terrible his crime was. After all, even the forensic medical experts officially stated that Tatiana suffered greatly from the 99 blows inflicted on her until she took her last breath. The mother of the deceased, Tatiana, commented on the court's decision as follows.
He got what he deserved. My child is gone. We have abolished the death penalty in Ukraine, but death is too easy. And the torment he caused my child, he should feel himself. But morally, while being in prison, God will judge him.
The story could have ended there, but it didn't. You see, Andriy, like his family, did not agree with the court's decision. They filed an appeal, and in February 2021, the Ternopil Court of Appeal reduced the prison sentence to 15 years instead of life imprisonment. The mother of the deceased almost fainted after the court session. At the new court hearing, the defense of the Ternopil demon claimed that Tatiana was under the influence of drugs on the night of the murder. Although no one had ever raised this issue before, you could say it's been years now. Andriy's lawyers also emphasized that the investigation did not properly examine all the case materials. They said that there were many fingerprints of other people, unidentified individuals in the apartment, but no one checked them. In the end, the appellate court agreed that Andriy was guilty, but that a life sentence is too harsh a punishment for him. They also added that the previous verdict did not provide convincing reasons for such a punishment, and they did not explain why Horbatiuk poses a particular danger to society. That's why the sentence is 15 years, not life. Horbatiuk commented on it, saying,
I don't understand why I've been sitting here for 2.5 years already. For what? If there isn't a single solid piece of evidence against me, then I don't understand how I was convicted at all.
However, the relatives of Tatiana Podvashecka did not agree with this. And they went to the Court of Appeals. A year later, the life sentence was reinstated, and in February 2023, this decision was upheld by the Supreme Court of Ukraine. Currently, Horbatiuk is serving his life sentence in the Drohobych Correctional Colony. If the Ternopil demon scared many people only with his appearance, then the next character in this episode, Mrs. Maria, basically didn't stand out much from others in terms of appearance, grandmothers. At first glance, an ordinary elderly village woman, almost. But in reality, she turned out to be a real monster who attacked her own family. What she did and how she did it is still considered the most sensational crime that has happened in Ternopil region since the early 2000s. So, Grandma Maria is a woman named Maria Vovk, originally from the village of Zahiria. The ancient, picturesque place has a river and a church with everything as it should be. But it's quite remote. The nearest railway station is 30 kilometers away. I don't know exactly how it is now, but according to data from 2003, only about 1,200 people lived there. It was in that year that a terrible tragedy happened in the village. However, nothing is known about who Maria Vovk was in her youth, let alone in her childhood. It's not surprising since the woman was born in the early 1940s of the last century. In the midst of World War II, there was no time to record the events in the life of an ordinary peasant woman. But it is known for sure that at about 20 years old, she got married and the couple had 2 sons. One of them eventually got married and left his family home, while the other, named Vasil, on the contrary, brought his wife to his parents' house. By the way, Vasil's wife had the same name as his mother, but she was called more affectionately Marika. Together, the 2 generations of the family were mainly engaged in agriculture. They raised geese, cows, other livestock, and tended to the vegetable garden. In short, they lived a normal, peaceful life in a small Ukrainian village, nothing extraordinary. However, not everything was perfect in that family. The mother-in-law and daughter-in-law had a strained relationship. Like, not at all. Marika, the daughter-in-law, recalls that she never heard a kind word from her mother-in-law. And some might say, what's the big deal? We all argue from time to time. Yes. But not every family has arguments that turn into real fights. And it wasn't just about the women. Maria the Elder had a strained relationship with her husband, who had a drinking problem and was physically abusive towards her. I can't say exactly when these fights and arguments started among the Vovkas, but I can say that it's simply impossible to stay sane for long in such conditions. The situation was slightly improved by the fact that there was also a summer kitchen in the yard near the house. Basically another almost full-fledged house where you could spend a couple of hours after an argument. Although Maria's husband liked to sleep there after having more than a few drinks, later the older Volkovs moved there completely, leaving the main house to the children. But despite all the troubles, fights and arguments, Maria and Vasil had children of their own. First, a girl named Oksana was born, and then 2 boys, just a year apart, Mikhailo and Volodya. Since then, the yard was always filled with children's noise and laughter. Although it's hard to call those years easy, just think about it yourself. The early 90s, 3 small children, a family where there's alcohol abuse and constant arguments. But as the daughter-in-law herself said, somehow they lived made up with each other. As the kids were growing up, their grandmother Maria gradually started to change. It's not that she was ever very friendly, but over time, the changes in her character became more striking. Listen to how the villagers described her. She was somewhat reclusive, never attending church, not even for confession or yearly at Easter. On Christmas Eve or Easter, she wouldn't even join her daughter-in-law and the children at the table. Many in the village were surprised that the grandmother, who was supposed to love her grandchildren, never spoiled them, never showed them affection, and never even treated them to anything. They said that Maria lived only for herself, and if she helped anyone, it was only the family of her other son, who didn't live with her, and she paid no attention to those who were nearby, as if they didn't even exist in the world. When the mailman brought the pension, the children would run after their grandfather, waiting for him to take them to the village store and buy them sweets. However, they didn't approach the grandmother because, as the villagers said, she never gave the children even a penny. So the woman gained quite a bad reputation as stingy, secretive, and unfriendly. On top of everything, Mrs. Maria seemed to have started having health problems. This is what her daughter-in-law, Marika, recalls.
Lately, closer to 2003, something was happening to Grandma. She reported hearing various voices, so we sought treatment for her. I told the doctors there was a problem that needed to be addressed, but they said, "Be patient, it's just due to age."
It's unlikely that at 61 years old, everyone just starts hearing voices. Age-related is a rather questionable diagnosis. However, the family had no choice but to take Grandma Maria home. It was in the spring of 2023, but the woman didn't get any better. The family recalls that Maria was twisting somehow. One day, she told her daughter-in-law's relatives the following.
"Take them away or there will be trouble."
And now back to the story. June 17th, 2003. Vasil and Marika Vovk woke up at dawn as usual. Before 6 antimeridiem, they had to leave for work at the farm. Vasil said he could manage alone, as he only needed to feed the cows and clean up after them. However, Marika milked the cow and followed her husband because it would be faster together. The children and older Vovki were still asleep. Baba Maria's husband drank quite a lot the night before, and even his son threw a phrase at him like, "Dad, why do you have to drink so much? You'll live longer without vodka." Back then, he didn't know that it wouldn't be vodka that would take his father away. Vasil and Marika really did come back from the farm quite quickly, around 7 in the morning, and they were surprised by what they saw. The summer kitchen and the house were locked with a padlock. They had never done that before. The couple rushed to the hiding place to find the keys, but it was empty. Then Vasil broke the padlock on the summer kitchen and without even looking inside, went on with his chores. He still had to feed the geese. Marika went in to strain the milk, but under the table she saw something terrifying. There was a whole puddle of blood there. Her father-in-law was lying unconscious, and his whole arm was covered in some strange wounds. The daughter-in-law started calling her husband with all her might, and while he was trying to bring his father back to consciousness, she herself ran to get the doctor, but it was all in vain. When the daughter-in-law returned with the doctor, they saw that not only was the old man's hand wounded, but his head as well. It had been hacked with an axe. Then Vasil ran to the main house, broke the lock there, because he knew that his children were supposed to be sleeping inside. The only thing he was able to say when he appeared on the doorstep again was, "They are all lying there, hacked to pieces." The youngest son, 9-year-old Volodya, was lying not far from the doorstep. As the boy's mother later recalled, he was hacked so badly that even his brains had come out. The body of 10-year-old Mikhailo, the second son, was found slightly deeper within the house. And the eldest child, 12-year-old Oksana, was found on the couch, also with axe wounds. None of the children survived. The only one who wasn't in the house, the yard, or the summer kitchen was Grandma Maria. So Vasil and his wife rushed to look for her. The pensioner didn't get far, according to her daughter-in-law's recollection.
They caught her right away in the bushes near the grove. I saw that the gate on that side was open. She was lying there as if unconscious, and next to her they found a razor with a wide blade.
The razor with Mrs. Maria wasn't there for no reason. She used it to cut her veins. On top of everything, they found a package of poison nearby. It was either for rats or for cockroaches. The pensioner drank this poison before using the razor. They quickly bandaged the woman and took her to the hospital because she was still alive, and they saved her. And soon she was brought to the police for questioning, where she told the details of what happened on the morning of June 17th. Here's what occurred. Marika and Vasil went to the farm, and soon after, old lady Maria woke up on her own. She regretted oversleeping. She thought if she had gotten up earlier, she would have done more and not spared anyone. It is likely that this means old lady Maria was planning to kill her son and daughter-in-law as well. Although she didn't say this directly. Getting out of bed, the woman put some beets to boil in a pot on the stove, and then took an old axe and struck her husband on the head 3 times with the blade while he was sleeping and snoring. According to the killer, this was how she took revenge on him for drinking and attacking her. Allegedly, 2 days before the tragedy, the man was especially drunk and attacked her with his fists again, which became the last straw. After finishing with her husband, Maria went to the house where the 3 children were, carrying an axe. 3 of her grandchildren. When the prosecutor asked, "Which of your grandchildren did you treat the best?" Grandma Maria answered without hesitation, "Makasi." As the investigation found out, he was the first one she killed. Then it was Volodya's turn. According to one version, both boys were sleeping and died that way. The woman simply dragged their bodies onto the floor so as not to stain the beds with blood. But according to another version, the boys supposedly even tried to escape. However, somehow the grandmother found the strength to prevent this, although she had previously told the neighbors that she couldn't even walk to the church because her legs hurt. Each of her grandsons, Ms. Maria struck with an axe 6 times. Then she went to the bed where her granddaughter Oksana was sleeping and killed her with an axe as well. Initially, Grandma Maria rationalized her harsh treatment of her grandchildren, offering 2 explanations. One version claims she wanted to ease her son and daughter-in-law's financial troubles. In her view, the kids caused many problems at home. In another version, the events allegedly occurred due to the grandchildren deeply offending Grandma Maria. Although at the trial she was shouting things like this:
I killed those children, but they didn't do anything to me. My son and daughter-in-law were innocent. She was a good woman. I don't know what happened to me. It wasn't me who did it. It was some evil force.
Whatever the case, after what she had done, in order to avoid criminal responsibility and not end up behind bars, the old woman decided to take her own life. So she took a razor, some poison, and went into the forest. However, as you already know, the plan failed miserably. At the court hearings, the woman repented for what she had done. But from time to time, she would shout out strange things that had nothing to do with the death of her grandchildren or her husband. She mentioned the money that was left in the savings book and shouted,
Children, tear down that damned homestead and build a new house.
And addressing her daughter-in-law always came down to a single phrase: My dear child, beloved, don't leave Vasil. Few people believed that Baba Maria was in her right mind, which was understandable. So she was sent for a special examination at a psychiatric hospital. Experts conducted tests and found the woman was fully aware of her actions, with no psychological issues detected. And she was found sane. The verdict for Baba Maria was read on the day when her murdered granddaughter Oksana would have turned 13 years old. The mother of the murdered children cried in court and said through her tears,
She should be cut and salted so she would suffer like my children did.
On October 10, 2003, the pensioner was sentenced to life imprisonment. She requested to be executed by a firing squad, but it was not feasible in Ukraine. Back in 2000, the Verkhovna Rada amended the criminal code, and such a punishment ceased to exist within our country. Maria Vovk was sent to serve her prison term in the Kachanivska correctional colony in the Kharkiv region. After what happened, in the village, everyone called Maria nothing but Baba Vovk. Devastated by grief, the parents Vasil and Maria could not continue living in the house where the child died after the tragedy. They moved their clothes and household items there. They themselves settled in the summer kitchen, where, I remind you, Vasil's father was found dead. Despite what Baba Vovchika had done, people in the village spoke only well of Vasil and Marika. They said that they were kind and hardworking. Vasil later got a job at the local farm, and his wife took care of the livestock and the garden at home. At that time, there were rumors in the media that her son visited Baba Maria in the colony, although both Vasil and Marika said that it wasn't true. However, they recalled that Vovchika sent letters from prison more than once. The daughter-in-law recalled the following.
The mother-in-law kept writing persistently, thinking maybe we had moved. But somehow I overcame myself and replied briefly. Several times she sent us packages with food. Oil, sugar, and flour sat unclaimed at the post office for months. And once she sent us 2,000 hryvnias, but I didn't want to keep a single penny of it for myself. So I gave part of it to the church and the rest to the orphanage. In her letters, Baba repented and asked for forgiveness.
But of course, no one was ever able to forgive Vovchisha. In her thoughts, the daughter-in-law kept replaying only one thing.
It would have been better if she had beaten me. The children would have somehow managed to grow up.
By the way, Marika never left Vasil. A few years later, something the family and others considered a real miracle happened. Marika Vovk became pregnant. The couple hoped that the baby would bring them back to a more normal life. However, things didn't turn out as they had hoped. A baby girl was born into the family, but she died just a couple of months later. The child was diagnosed with a complex heart condition that couldn't be cured. Meanwhile, Baba Vovchika wrote in her letters from the colony that she was doing well. She said there was a color television in her cell and she had everything she wanted, according to Vovchika's daughter-in-law.
My mother-in-law receives a pension, so she has some savings. Of course, part of it is deducted for her maintenance. By the way, she asked us to come visit her. She said she would buy us a television too, but we refused. We don't want anything from her.
It's interesting that human rights activists described the colony where Vovchika was held as a high-security facility. They said that the colony is considered exemplary, and the rules there are very strict. People are broken there. The administration controls everything there. But if you judge the colony by Vovchika's letters, things aren't that bad there, at least for her. The killer of her grandchildren and spouse lived another 13 years after the crime. At 74, in the fall of 2016, her heart stopped. Her son Vasil received a message from the colony about his mother's death. However, no one went to the funeral of Vovchika. She was buried without her family. The next story also has, let's say, the title of one of the most high-profile murders in Ternopil region. And all because of 208 hryvnias, a dark-haired, always smiling girl who chose the difficult profession of being a taxi driver. This is how Yevgenia Kordupel's colleagues remember her. Everyone knew that the blue Chevrolet with the call sign 22 was our Zhenya, said an acquaintance of hers. Zhenya is originally from Zbaraj, Ternopil region. Perhaps more than anything else in life, the woman loved two things, the act of driving and the job that was inseparably connected to it. Zhenya worked as a driver in the very important person service, then pilot, and later the 549 service. They said she could have started her own business. She had the opportunities for it. But she didn't want to give up her favorite activity, driving a car and talking to people. One day, Yevgenia had a terrible accident. However, even that didn't make the woman give up her favorite occupation. Acquaintances, speaking on condition of anonymity, said that once Zhenya was driving home late at night and fell asleep at the wheel. Her car was speeding down the road until it veered off onto the shoulder. The car crashed into a tree. Zhenya was taken by ambulance and underwent surgery soon after. She survived and recalled that she was born under a lucky star. As a reminder of this incident, she was left with scars on her arms and chin forever. Despite the challenges, she remained unafraid to drive and chose to modify her work approach instead. Since the day of the accident, Zhenya swore never to work to exhaustion again, especially when she felt sleepy. And by the way, you shouldn't do that either. Safety comes first. At the age of 36, Yevgenia was in a relationship with a man named Pavlo Romaniuk. The couple had a common-law marriage without children. Interestingly, Pavlo and Zhenya met thanks to a taxi back in 2013. The man called a car to transport a computer. He recalls the driver was an attractive and serious woman. They exchanged a few words on the way and then went their separate ways. However, Pavlo couldn't forget the woman. The next time he needed to call a taxi again, he called the same service and asked for the woman to come. The woman taxi driver, the dispatcher, fulfilled his request. That same day, Zhenya and Pavlo exchanged numbers and fell in love, deciding to stay together. Pavlo finally proposed to Zhenya, gave her a ring that she has worn on her finger ever since, and the couple was preparing for the wedding. They invited Zhenya's mother, who was working abroad at the time, and were waiting for her blessing. However, on December 25th, 2015, on Christmas Eve, a tragedy occurred. Acquaintances remember Zhenya as a very cautious and selective driver when it came to choosing clients. She tried not to take drunk passengers, forbade smoking in the car, and simply made such people get out of the vehicle. However, that evening, for some reason, she deviated from her own rules, perhaps because it was Christmas Eve. Around 6:30 post-meridium, two young men were looking for a taxi at the stand on Zhivova Street. They approached one driver. He refused. The second one also refused. The drivers didn't want to leave the city on Christmas Eve, but the young men needed to go all the way to Pidvolochisk, which is 37 kilometers from Ternopil. They missed the bus, and there was no point in waiting for a train either. And the road, in fact, is long. Over an hour by bus or 40 minutes by car, so they wanted to find a taxi. Eventually, the young man approached a blue Chevrolet, with Zhenya behind the wheel. Probably, the woman felt sorry for the guys, so she agreed to take the passengers. Traveling outside of Ternopil was not an issue for her. She had personally driven people to Yampil and Kiev. At that time, the woman did not suspect that this decision would be fatal for her. And this would be the last trip of her life. The two passengers who got into the car at that time were 16-year-old Alexander Dektiar and 19-year-old Petro Lukacs. They were returning home from Ternopil to Pitvolokhisk. Were the guys drunk when they got into the car? It is not exactly known, at least for sure. Most likely they were. The day before, a store camera on the same Jevova street recorded that the young men bought cigarettes and a bottle of vodka. They paid with a 500 hryvnia bill. They probably drank that same vodka before the trip, since it wasn't in the car. As soon as they set off, Zhenya immediately became alert. She texted Pavlo, her future husband, at around 6:30 saying, "I have a ride, but I'm taking some suspicious people." On the way to Pitvolokhisk, the taxi driver also called her friends with the same intention, to warn them that she had strange passengers. On the way to the destination, the blue Chevrolet stopped twice. First at a gas station, and then near the village of Anhelivka, which is roughly halfway between Ternopil and Pitvolokhisk. There, Zhenya's passengers asked to stop so they could use the restroom. However, the bridegroom, relatives, and acquaintances of the female taxi driver suspect the male passengers may have been using drugs. When they stopped to use the restroom, supposedly they actually took something there. After they returned to the car, they started behaving differently, strangely. One of the passengers now sat next to Zhenya in the front instead of the back, but that was fine and not worth arguing over. The conflict arose when Zhenya drove the passengers to their destination. At that time, it was around 7:30 in the evening. The guys were supposed to pay 208 hryvnias for the ride. That's what the meter showed. They disliked the price, leading to an argument that began with the woman being beaten. She was beaten on her head, face, and arms, both inside the car and after being pulled out onto the street. According to relatives, the driver was dragged to a nearby pit. However, Zhenya managed to break free. She ran to a blue Chevrolet and tried to escape from the enraged young men, but they caught up with her inside the car and continued beating her. Eventually, one of the guys who was in the back seat took a knife out of his pocket and stabbed the female taxi driver in the left side of her neck. While Zhenya was bleeding in the car, the young men ran to the nearest spring to wash the blood off themselves. The female driver wasn't going to give up. Even with a serious neck wound, she started the car and drove on, trying to save herself. A few minutes later, residents near Voloshisk noticed a car swerving on the road. They rushed to stop the reckless driver, but were horrified when they saw Zhenya covered in blood and bruises. Her whole face was bruised, her fingernails were broken, and her hair was messy and even torn out in some places. The most terrifying thing was the open wound on her neck, from which blood kept flowing. Eyewitnesses called an ambulance, and soon Zhenya was placed in the intensive care unit of the district hospital. Pavlo, the woman's partner who was already at the medical facility, describes what he witnessed. She was lying under an intravenous drip. Her neck was deeply cut. There were only 2 millimeters left to the carotid artery. Because her epiglottis was cut, she couldn't speak. She lost a lot of blood, but she held on bravely. Closer to 11 p.m., a team of doctors from Ternopil arrived, and Zhenya was taken for surgery. The surgery was successful, and Yevgenia regained consciousness in the morning. And she was even allowed to see her closest ones. She was only forbidden to speak because the stitches could come apart. Pavlo, who was nearby, recalls that even after her surgery, Zhenya was not thinking about herself, but about the condition of her car. She asked for paper and a pen. She quickly started writing. She wrote about the car and the documents that were inside. She wasn't thinking about herself. Suddenly, she became anxious, and the doctors advised me to leave the room. That was the last time the man saw his... I wanted to say future wife, but... the woman who was supposed to become his future wife. Suddenly, there was a commotion in the ward. Zhenya was examined again. They quickly determined an urgent X-ray was necessary, which revealed one lung was filled with blood. The woman's condition suddenly worsened, and unfortunately they couldn't save her. On December 26, 2015, the doctors declared the death of Yevgenia Kordupel. On the day of the funeral, more than 100 cars from Ternopil taxi services gathered. Her colleagues decided to show solidarity, pay tribute to Zhenya, and escort her in a convoy to her hometown of Zbaraj. At that time, as you can imagine, the taxi drivers were very outraged by the tragedy. Those who spoke with journalists said that attacks on drivers by passengers were not uncommon. Everyone had 2 or 3 cases when they were on the verge of life and death because of clients. One of the taxi drivers named Ihor said the following to journalists on the day of Yevgenia's funeral. There used to be very few female taxi drivers. They were never assigned to work the night shift. And they didn't agree to let them go outside the city. When any taxi driver left Ternopil, they always took the client's passport details and gave them to the dispatcher. Only then were we allowed an out-of-town trip. Now you can see for yourself. The taxi drivers were serious about it. They wanted to find those responsible themselves and deal with them in their own way. As they said, in case the law enforcement officers don't do their job properly. However, investigators were already searching for the attackers, but doing so swiftly proved challenging.
During the ride, she mentioned that she was driving drunk, not very adequate people, and informed her friends about it. She couldn't give us any details. The physical injuries she sustained made it impossible for her to speak.
The thing is, the young men, as you may recall, didn't order a taxi through the dispatcher. They took it, ordered it right on the street, and spoke with Yevgenia one-on-one. Therefore, there was no phone number that could be used to find them.
They provide a taxi car, and they don't influence the process, let's say, of how those or other cars take turns.
The attackers also took the dash cam from the car. Even Zhenya, who was briefly with Tayama, couldn't describe the assailants. She only said there were multiple attackers. Interestingly, the guys who attacked came back to Ternopil the next day to sell what they had stolen from Yevgenia's car. Again by taxi. Turns out the car was missing more than just the dashcam. On December 26th, the young men pawned a tablet counter for 700 hryvnias and a phone, which officially cost 852 hryvnias. They split the money among themselves and probably thought they got away with it. But just 4 days later, they were handcuffed. Because even though they stole the dashcam, they left plenty of fingerprints at the crime scene. Not much is known about the killers, except that their past was far from spotless. In particular, it was thanks to the criminal past of 19-year-old Petro Lukac that it was possible to determine who was in the taxi on December 25th. The boy's fingerprints were in the police database. Ternopil media reported that his sister raised him until adulthood. Lukac had been convicted before because his parents had previously lost their parental rights, and that was in the same year, 2015. On November 27th, he stole a phone from a boy near school number 24 in Ternopil. He fled the scene and immediately went to a pawn shop to sell the stolen goods. But how exactly they found the second anti-hero, Alexander, is not entirely clear.
At the moment, the involvement of another person who was also in the car is being checked in connection with this crime. This person is a minor.
In one account, Lukac pointed to him. According to another version, when the case became public, it happened that the boy's mother found his bloodstained jacket at home. She got scared that she would have to take responsibility since her son was a minor, and she took the jacket to the police station. And right there at the station, she shouted at the young criminal, "I hope you die!" Pavlo Romaniuk, the deceased's fiancé, said that Lukac or Dektiar confessed to everything during the initial interrogation. However, later, in the presence of lawyers, they started blaming each other. Pavlo Romaniuk pointed out the following details. They went out 10 times to conduct the investigative experiment before they finally managed to recreate everything. The older one was cunning, sometimes pretending to faint, other times acting crazy. But the facts are concrete and unambiguous. The court proceedings in the case lasted from July 2015 to May 2019. Many of the hearings were attended not by the mother of the murdered Zhenya, but by her acquaintance, Nina Chura. After all, Miss Lesia was abroad at first, and then she started having health problems because of what she had gone through. At the hearing, Nina Chura would come with a portrait of Zhenya. The woman explained that this was her way of appealing to the killer's conscience. In her view, they acted very defiantly. And when the mother of the murdered girl appeared at the hearing, Petro Lukac lashed out at her right in the courtroom.
Once, Lukac nearly broke the cage, shouting, "I'll show you." He complained about losing everything in life, but I've also lost something. They are alive, while my daughter is in the grave. It seems that Zhenya's killers still haven't realized anything. I didn't see any remorse in them.
Despite the fact that Mrs. Lesia's words are emotional, they are actually true, because none of the attackers agreed to cooperate with the investigation, and of course, no one said a single word of apology. The mother of the murdered Zhenya kept asking herself just one question: why?
I still ask myself, why did they do that to Zhenya? Was it really for those 200 hryvnias everyone was supposed to pay for the ride? They say that one of them had drugs sent to him and bread by his so-called friends from outside, but the guards found them.
As for the drugs in the bread, I haven't found any official confirmation. It's just what people say. However, one fact can be considered established. Both Dektyar and Lukacs tried in every possible way, if not to get away scot-free, then at least to shorten their time in prison. According to Nina Chura, their lawyers emphasized that Dektyar was a minor, and therefore asked the court to be more lenient with him. And Lukacs, the woman said, emphasized that he was planning to get married and have a child. And if he had actually done that, he could have at least counted on mitigating circumstances. In addition, the defense side was constantly delaying the court proceedings. This would have been beneficial for the killers because when they attacked Zhenya, the Savchenko law was in effect, as we already know. According to it, 1 day in a pre-trial detention center is counted as 2 days in prison. Regardless of the final sentence, criminals preferred to stay longer in pre-trial detention as it allowed them to serve their punishment faster and avoid the harsher conditions of a penal colony. On top of everything, the panel of judges itself was changed 3 times. Some retired, while others simply went on vacation. In other words, it was necessary to allocate additional time for the new panel of judges to study the case. Although, to be fair, the victim's side emphasized that they did not notice any bias on the part of the judges. Finally, on May 23, 2019, a verdict was announced in the Ternopil City District Court. Petro Lukacs was sentenced to 15 years in prison with confiscation of property, and Alexander Dektyar received 13 years in prison since at the time of the attack he was still a minor. The killers also had to pay compensation to Zhenya's mother in the amount of 500,000 hryvnias. Ms. Lysia agreed with the verdict, although she wanted a much harsher punishment.
For me, since I live alone, I'm, for example, afraid. They are criminals. They can come just like they traveled from Zakarpattia region, Ternopil region. They travel everywhere. They can come to the city of Zabaraj, and who knows what they could do to me. I asked that the court punish them with the highest possible severity.
The criminals did not come to hear the verdict in person. They were contacted via video call. Only Alexander Dektyar's grandfather came to the court. He apologized for his grandson and said that he is actually kind, calm, and gentle. Dektyar, in his final statement, asked not to be judged harshly, and Lukacs apologized, asked not to be punished, and said that the police made many mistakes during the investigation. However, none of that helped. By the way, here's an interesting fact about the family of the younger person involved in the case, Alexander Dektyar. While the court was determining whether he was guilty or not, his own brother was detained for robbery and rape of a woman in Ternopil. What a wonderful family. But since we're already talking about the Ternopil region, it's impossible to ignore the case of the horrific attack on 17-year-old Irinka Mukoid. There's so much mixed up in this case that it makes your head spin. Youth Day celebrations, a black sport utility vehicle, a knife in the heart, psychics. But the main thing is something else. The point is, there's still no court decision that would clearly indicate who's guilty in this. But let's go through everything step by step. Ira Mukoida, or as her family and friends used to call her, Irinka, lived in Vishnivets, which is 41 kilometers from Ternopil. Not a child, but an angel. That's how everyone who knew Irinka spoke about her. And that's despite the fact that the girl's fate was not easy, since early childhood. Her biological parents went abroad to work when Irinka was just a little girl. At first, her grandparents took care of her, and later, when her grandmother went to work in Italy, the child stayed with her aunt Olha and uncle Ivan Yaremchuk. She called them mom and dad and hardly communicated with her biological parents. In 2017, the girl graduated from the local school. After graduation, she planned to enter the National Academy of the State Border Guard Service of Ukraine in Khmelnytsky. She submitted her documents and was scheduled to take the exams in July 2017. But that day never came. On June 25th, they were celebrating Youth Day in Vishnevets. Music, dancing, singing, alcohol, and lots of conversations. Irinka also went to the celebration. At 1:30 ante-meridium, she called her mother, Olia, saying she'd be home soon. However, the girl never showed up at the doorstep, and at 6:40 in the morning, her body was found on the side of one of the highways. A knife and personal belongings were lying next to the body. Moreover, the villagers claim that at 6 in the morning, they walked along the same road, and at that time, the body was not there yet. The law enforcement officers began their work. When the forensic experts got involved and determined what had happened to the girl, to say that everyone was shocked would be an understatement. Irinka was attacked with a knife, she was stabbed right in the heart, her lung was pierced, and after she had already died, the perpetrator undressed her and raped her. For a long time, the police couldn't identify the culprit. They explored various scenarios of the incident. One of the theories was that the perpetrators were not locals. Allegedly, the girl was given a ride at night in a black sport utility vehicle by unknown individuals, who then threw her lifeless body out of the moving vehicle. And at first, there was even supposedly a witness who saw the girl being thrown out of the car. But then it turned out that this witness was mentally ill and he was sent to a psychiatric hospital. So his testimony wasn't very reliable. They also suspected a man from the neighboring village. He was seen the day before with a group near the bus stop where Irinka was. But no other evidence was found that would indicate he was actually involved. But a week later, law enforcement detained 16-year-old student Vasil Horbatiuk from the local college, a resident of the neighboring village Dzvinyak. It turned out that the boy had quite an interesting background. He allegedly started drinking at the age of 13, and the villagers said that he was quite talkative and constantly got into arguments. He also abused animals, recorded it on video and posted it online. However, he wasn't punished for that. But he did go to court for stealing a car. In April 2017, the guy stole a car in his own village. On the way, he lost control and the car skidded into a ditch. Vasil admitted his guilt at the time and compensated the car owner for the damages, so he didn't end up behind bars. But that's in the past. So, what happened that night during the Youth Day celebration? According to the investigation, the guy was drunk. When he saw Irinka, who was already heading home, he followed her. When the girl finished her phone call, Vasil approached her, called out, and when she turned around, he stabbed her in the chest. According to the investigation, he found the murder weapon on the street the day before. When he stabbed Irinka with the knife, he got scared and ran away. Law enforcement claimed that they found Irinka's and Vasil's DNA on the knife. In addition, the murdered girl's blood was found on the pants that were taken from the suspect. Besides that, the police released recordings of phone conversations of Vasil Horbatiuk's father, mother, and brother. The conversations are unclear, not in the sense that they can't be heard, but in the sense that it's hard to understand whether Vasil confessed to his brother on the first day about what he did, or if he told him this only after he was already at the police station. A recording of a conversation between Vasil Horbatiuk's mother, Natalia Zhuk, and his brother Vlad.
He confessed to killing her a long time ago. It's a complete mess, Mom.
What are you saying?
What am I saying? I'm saying what I'm saying. I don't even know what it's supposed to... I've already cried all my tears here. I don't know what else is supposed to happen. I'm telling you, I've already told everything I know. Everything I knew about that evening, that's all. What I said, I don't know anything else. He says that when I went into his office, I asked him, Vasya, did you even think about what you were saying? As they were questioning him somewhere. He says he didn't think about his actions, but did it regardless. I was left speechless and started crying uncontrollably. Mom, I hadn't cried like that in a long time. Something profound was happening to me.
Maybe they beat him. Maybe they did something to him, Vladik.
I checked and they didn't beat him. He's fine and everything's calm.
Next is a recording of a conversation between a woman named Raya. It's unknown who she is to Vasil Horbatiuk and his brother Vlad.
Explain it to me again. Is it a lie?
What is a lie?
What they're saying, he wasn't there, was he? I can't...
I don't know. He admitted to me himself today that he was there. When he told me that, my legs just gave out.
What did he tell you? He's lying. He couldn't have been there, Vladik.
I don't know.
Tell me, what did he tell you?
Back then, I came in and started hitting him. He told me, you don't know what happened, what went on. I asked, what happened? He said, I killed a man.
He wasn't alone. Who else was there? I spoke with him, and he said, no, Aunt Raya, what are you talking about?
No, he also told me not to.
Well, what do you mean, no? And you're his brother. What do you think?
I don't know what to think anymore, honestly.
Vasil Horbatiuk's mother, Natalia Zhuk, asked to remove the Ternopil police from the case because, according to her, the police kidnapped her son and tortured him for 12 hours.
After that, she came to the pasture to get my father so he could give testimony. My father is an alcoholic and hasn't lived with me for more than 10 years. They gave my father alcohol, and they put a knife in the little one's hand and showed him how to cut, then recorded everything on video. My oldest son was also taken from home, tortured for 2 hours, and beaten on the head and chest with car armrests. Is this the kind of country we live in where children are abused like this?
Vasyl Hnatyuk himself also reported threats from law enforcement officers during the investigation. He was allegedly threatened with physical violence, but the boy did not say who exactly. Here are his words. I was sitting in the car when a plainclothes police officer came up to me and started threatening me. Don't deny that you're guilty, because I have a recording where you confess. I'll give it to the inmates in prison and they'll might go. You know din kono farm. You tanda de sa. Vasyl Hnatyuk's lawyers had other arguments in favor of the guy as well. One of the main arguments was that the knife was allegedly planted at the crime scene. However, there is no evidence of this. The Ternopil investigators admitted that they made a mistake when working at the crime scene. The forensic expert picked up the knife before the investigators documented the details of the crime scene. Alexander Bohomal, who was then the head of the main department of the National Police in Ternopil region, said, "It was a minor violation by the people who were inspecting the scene, but it doesn't change anything. The expert was wearing gloves and the knife was placed where it had been. Then it was packed into a special bag." The accusations that police planted the knife are absurd, as it was passers-by, not police, who found the girl's body. There were dozens of people at the scene who saw the body, as well as how the phone and the knife were lying. The defense also insisted that Vasyl Hnatyuk had no motive for the attack, and the confession that Vasyl wrote at the police station looks as if it was dictated by someone with a legal background. After all, the guy doesn't speak like that and doesn't even know some of those words. Even Natalia Kosteleva, a representative of the project Psychics Lead the Investigation, stood up for Vasyl. In the program, the woman acted as a forensic expert. However, it's unclear where she got such qualifications. In 2017, she actively posted various versions on her Facebook about where the investigation made mistakes and why Vasyl Hnatyuk was not guilty. For example, in her opinion, the knife that was found at the crime scene was not the murder weapon. The body was discovered in a location different from the actual crime scene. However, she provided no facts to support her statement. The investigation lasted about 6 months. However, because minors are involved in the case, and due to the nature of the crime, there is very little information available to the public. It is only known that Vasyl was charged with murder and unnatural rape of the girl, and in 2017 the case was finally brought to court. However, everything was delayed. The hearings were repeatedly scheduled but postponed each time. The boy lacked a proper defense because 2 of his 3 lawyers were drafted into Ukraine's military. Another one failed to appear in court without any reason.
On the first day, the Center for Free Legal Aid was informed and 1 lawyer was assigned from there. I know that he got involved either in the court hearing or in the preliminary one, but I can't say for sure. Another lawyer who was hired by the family, and now a 3rd lawyer has already been hired.
There were issues with the witnesses. Initially listed as participants, this idea was later abandoned. At first glance, these are minor details. But firstly, there were too many of these minor details, and secondly, all of them could delay the case review for a month or even longer. Nearly 7 years have passed under these conditions. Irinka Mukoida was buried in the summer of 2017 dressed in a white dress. Her classmates covered her final path with rose petals. About 2,000 people came to the funeral back then. The girl's mother knelt by her grave, pleading to find those responsible.
Help me, I begged you. I don't want anything else. I just want to see those who did this, their eyes. I'll recognize those eyes right away. I feel that if I just see them, I'll immediately know who it is.
At the moment, the woman tends to think that it was none other than Vasyl Hnatyuk who did this. The man has been in the detention center for nearly 7 years. He was found to be sane and has been an adult for a considerable time. If the investigation's version is true, the guy faces 15 years in prison. But there is still no verdict, and accordingly, no officially recognized guilty person in the case of the murder and rape of Irinka Mukoida. There is only a suspect who may be guilty, but what if he is not guilty? For now, all we can do is closely monitor to make sure that the perpetrator or perpetrators are actually held accountable for what they've done. If any additional information about this case appears, I will write about it on my Telegram channel. Thank you, dear ones, for watching this video all the way to this very second. Take care of yourselves. You are the best.